I knew something was wrong the moment I found myself standing at the door again, my hand resting on the lock I never turned. It was past midnight. The house silent in that way only an empty home can be. And yet I stood there hoping she might walk in the way she used to. Without knocking, without hesitation, without thinking I needed a reason to see my own child. I kept the door unlocked every night. Not because it was safe, but because it was the only way I could quiet the fear that she might come by and find the door closed between us. I told myself I was being practical. In truth, I was afraid she wouldn't come at all. Morning came like it always does, slow and gray, and I sat at the table pretending I hadn't waited for footsteps that never arrived. She showed up around noon, not with warmth or worry, but with a rushed sigh and eyes already fixed on her phone. "You should be grateful I visit at all," she said, as if kindness were something I had to earn from her now. Her words stung more because she said them casually, like she'd repeated them to herself long before saying them to me. She didn't sit down. She didn't ask how I slept or how my back felt. She moved around the room checking things, lights left on, dishes in the sink, papers on the counter, as if she were inspecting the place instead of visiting her father. She tapped on a stack of envelopes and asked why I hadn't sorted them. "You know you can't let things pile up," she said, her tone sharp, impatient. It wasn't concern, it was control. I noticed she kept glancing at her phone, reading messages she didn't want me to see. Whoever she was talking to had a tight hold on her. The way she straightened her posture after each buzz told me she wasn't speaking for herself anymore. She mentioned her partner only once, but the way she said, "He thinks you need more structure," told me everything. There was someone shaping her opinions, someone who saw me as a task, not a father. Then she shifted the conversation to money. Awkwardly, like she was stepping into a role she hadn't practiced enough. She asked about my bills, my savings, whether I had thought about long-term planning. Her voice wavered as she said it, like she knew the words didn't belong to her. I tried to answer honestly, but the more I spoke, the colder she became. By the time she stood to leave, she looked at me the way people look at a problem they don't want to deal with. When the door closed behind her, the house felt smaller than it had the night before. I sat down slowly, realizing that the worst part of growing old wasn't the pain or the memory lapses. It was knowing the people you love might drift so far away that you become invisible to them. I feared being forgotten long before she ever said the words out loud. Now I feared something even heavier, that the distance wasn't an accident. What would you think if your child told you to be grateful for their presence? She used to come in with stories to tell, her voice filling the house the way sunlight fills a dim room. Now, when she visits, the first thing she does is look around. Not at me, but at the furniture, the floor, the corners where dust settles if I'm tired. Her eyes scan everything the way an inspector checks a rental unit after a tenant moves out. I can feel her judgment before she even speaks. "Why is this here?" she asks, pointing at a stack of mail I haven't opened yet. She flips through the envelopes without waiting for my permission. Each one she sighs at feels like another mark against me. She isn't looking for understanding, she's looking for proof that I'm slipping. Then she moves to the kitchen, opening cabinets, checking dates on food as if I've forgotten how to take care of myself. She picks up my prescription bottle and shakes it, counting the pills with a frown. "You're behind, Dad," she murmurs, not with worry, but with irritation. I tell her I haven't missed a dose. I've just been spacing them out to avoid side effects. She doesn't hear me. She only hears what fits the story she's building. Her phone buzzes several times while she's walking through the rooms. Each time she pulls it close to her chest, reading the messages in silence. She never says who it is, but I can tell by the way her expression tightens and then resets that it's him, her partner. He's guiding her, instructing her, shaping the questions she asks. I can almost feel his presence in the room, even though he's not there. At one point she says, "We need to start planning for the future." The way she says we makes my stomach twist. It's not a conversation. It's a directive. She talks about simplifying things, making sure my affairs are easier to manage. But there's nothing gentle in her tone. It's rehearsed, like something she practiced in the car before coming in. She pulls out one of my bank statements and asks why I withdrew a certain amount last month. When I tell her it was for a repair on the furnace, she nods, but continues scanning the numbers as if she's looking for a mistake. Her voice turns colder with each question, each insinuation. I feel less like her father and more like a client she doesn't trust. There's a moment when she asks if I've considered giving her temporary access to my accounts just in case. She tries to sound casual, but her eyes are too focused, too hungry. I tell her I'll think about it. But inside, dread grows like a shadow stretching across the floor. I can tell she doesn't see me as family anymore. She sees me as a responsibility, one she'd rather manage than love. By the time she leaves, the house feels heavier than before. I sit down slowly, trying to make sense of the change. It's subtle, quiet, but unmistakable. Something is slipping between us. Not age, not distance, but intent. I wasn't expecting anything unusual that morning. I walked out to the mailbox like I always do, leaning a little on the railing, breathing in the cool air to steady myself before facing another quiet day. But when I opened the box, a thick envelope sat on top of the usual bills. My name printed neatly across the front in bold letters. I didn't recognize the sender. I hadn't asked for anything. Still, I carried it inside, telling myself it was probably some routine update. At the table, I slid a finger under the seal and pulled out a stack of papers. My stomach tightened as I read the first page. It was a beneficiary update form, already filled out, already processed, waiting for a signature that wasn't mine. My daughter's name had been listed as primary, and someone had tried to sign on my behalf. The signature had the right letters, but the wrong shape. The handwriting leaned too far to the right. It felt like looking at a stranger's hand wearing my skin. I kept flipping through the pages. There were drafts of account access requests, all with my information pre-filled. One form even suggested adding a secondary financial manager and listed her partner's name as if it was obvious he belonged there. I felt my chest grow tight. I hadn't approved any of it. I hadn't even been asked. When she came by later that week, I placed the envelope on the table. "Did you request these?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. She barely glanced at the papers before saying, "Dad, these are standard. Everyone does this. It's for your protection." She said it with a tone that dismissed every concern before it left my mouth. I pointed out the forged signature. She shrugged. "It's just a draft. Don't make it a big deal." But there was a flicker in her eyes. Something uncomfortable, something guilty. And when her phone buzzed, she reached for it quickly, as if the message inside mattered more than the truth sitting in front of her. I started noticing patterns then. The way she avoided direct answers. The way she leaned on phrases that didn't sound like her. Phrases someone else fed her. Financial stability. Long-term planning. Streamlined access. These weren't her words. They were his. That night, I sat at my desk with a small notebook. I wrote down the date, the forms, her answers, and the way her partner seemed to be guiding her through every step, even when he wasn't in the room. I didn't want to believe she was capable of hurting me. But the papers didn't lie, and neither did the way she kept pushing for control without saying the word out loud. As I looked at the forms again, a deeper fear settled in. It wasn't just about money. It was about the slow erasing of my choices, my autonomy, my future. These forms weren't for my protection. They were for their plans. Plans that didn't seem to include me standing on my own 2 feet. What would you do if someone filled out forms in your name? I first heard it from a neighbor, a soft-spoken man who usually avoids anything that sounds like gossip. He stopped me at the mailbox, shifting uncomfortably before saying, "I heard you've been forgetting things lately. Everything okay?" His words hit me like a cold gust. I told him I was fine, but he kept giving me that careful look people use when they think you're fragile. When he walked away, I stood there staring at the mail in my hands, wondering who had planted that idea. The answer came on Sunday at church. A woman I've known for 20 years pulled me aside, her voice low. "Your daughter told us you've been a little off lately," she said gently. "She said she's worried you can't keep up with everything." The way she said it, slow, cautious, told me she believed it. Or at least she wasn't sure not to. Shame settled over me like a heavy coat I couldn't shrug off. I sat through the service hearing whispers that weren't spoken. People glanced at me longer than usual, as if they were trying to see signs of some decline. My hands shook not from age, but from anger rising quietly inside me. I wasn't forgetting anything. I wasn't confused. But she needed people to think I was. It was easier to take control of a man if the world believed he couldn't manage his own life. Later that afternoon, I checked her social media page. I don't usually look at those things, but something in me pushed to see. And there it was, a post about caring for aging parents and managing decline with compassion. She wrote that some elders don't know when they need help. Her partner had commented beneath it, "You're doing the right thing. Keep being strong." Reading those words felt like taking a blow straight to the chest. She wasn't just preparing me for loss of control. She was preparing an audience. She was building a story, one where she played the responsible daughter and I played the failing father. The more people she convinced, the easier it would be to justify whatever paperwork she had planned next. I called her that evening. I didn't accuse her. I didn't raise my voice. I simply asked why she told people I was slipping. There was a pause, long enough to reveal guilt, short enough to hide it. Then she said, "Dad, I'm just being honest. You've been behind on things. People need to understand the situation." Cold, detached, as if my reputation, my dignity, my independence were small sacrifices for her convenience. I put the phone down after that, feeling something inside me fracture in a way I couldn't see but could feel. I understood then that she wasn't only preparing to take over my decisions, she was preparing everyone around me to accept it. And once people believe you're losing your mind, it's hard to convince them otherwise. That night, the house felt tighter, quieter. Isolation settled around me, heavier than the darkness. I realized I wasn't just losing my daughter. I was losing the version of myself she wanted this world to see. And if I didn't protect who I really was, no one else would. I thought I had already seen the worst of it. The rumors, the cold visits, the paperwork with my name twisted into shapes I didn't recognize. But nothing prepared me for the day I realized they weren't just influencing people's opinions about me. They were trying to rewrite my life on paper, piece by piece, as if I had already stepped out of it. It began with a letter from my insurance provider. I opened it at the kitchen table, expecting a routine update. Instead, I found a power of attorney draft with my daughter's name listed as the primary agent. My supposed signature sat at the bottom, tilted and uneven. Nothing like my own. My breath caught in my chest. I ran my thumb across the ink, as if touching it would somehow make the truth less sharp. Someone had tried to take control of every decision I had left. A few hours later, my doctor's office called. The nurse sounded hesitant, choosing her words carefully. She said my daughter's partner had reached out requesting information about my recent changes in behavior and asked whether I needed a capacity evaluation. The nurse asked if I had misplaced medication or forgotten appointments. I told her no, that nothing like that had happened. She paused before saying, "I just wanted to make sure. We see patterns like this sometimes." Her voice carried a weight I couldn't ignore. I hung up the phone and sat still, letting the realization settle. They were building a case against me. Not a legal case in court, but a narrative. One where I was losing my mind, where my choices couldn't be trusted, where they could step in and take control without anyone raising a question. The next blow came from the bank. I went in to ask about a confusing alert I had received. The banker pulled up my records and frowned. Someone had attempted to add a secondary signer to one of my accounts, my daughter's partner again. The request had been denied for missing documentation, but the attempt alone made my stomach twist. The banker leaned in gently and said, "Sir, I think you should know. This is something we see in exploitation cases. Older adults targeted for financial control. Please be careful." Hearing the word exploitation made my hands shake. I wasn't confused. I wasn't declining. But they wanted the world to believe I was. They wanted the systems around me to doubt my clarity. And once doubt takes root, it can grow faster than truth. I went home with a folder of printouts the banker insisted I keep. Unauthorized access attempts, suspicious requests, notes showing repeated contact from someone who had no right to speak for me. Each page felt like another piece of my life being lifted from my hands without permission. That evening, I sat at my desk staring at the documents, feeling the kind of horror that doesn't make noise. It just settles deep, slow and cold. If they succeeded, they wouldn't need my permission for anything. My medical treatments, my home, my savings, even where I lived. They could speak for me while I stood right there in the room. I realized then that love alone wouldn't protect me. Hope wouldn't protect me. I needed something stronger, legal protection, real boundaries, a shield against the people who were supposed to carry my legacy, not dismantle it. I gathered every document, every note, every warning. The sadness was still there, but it had changed. It wasn't the grief of losing a relationship anymore. It was the grief of realizing they had already planned a future where my voice didn't matter. What would you do if someone tried to take your choices away before you were gone? I didn't call the police myself. I didn't have the strength to make that first move. My lawyer did it for me after he looked through every document I'd brought in. Pages marked with forged signatures, denied access attempts, and notes no decent child should ever have caused their parent to write. He didn't waste time. He filed for emergency protective orders, freezing any financial changes connected to my name. He spoke to me calmly, but his eyes told a different story. He'd seen cases like this before. Too many. Within days, officers reached out requesting statements. They came to my home, sat at my kitchen table, and asked me to explain everything from the beginning. I felt old while talking, small, tired. But they treated me with respect. They didn't dismiss my fears. They didn't question my clarity. They listened. When I showed them the signatures that weren't mine, one of the officers pressed his lips together and said, "You did the right thing coming forward." A part of me broke at those words. I shouldn't have needed to come forward about my own daughter. But here I was. When the police contacted her, she called me almost immediately, her voice sharp with anger, not remorse. "Dad, why would you involve them? You're blowing everything out of proportion." She wasn't worried she'd hurt me. She was worried she'd been caught. I tried to keep my voice steady as I told her I hadn't lied. I told her the evidence spoke for itself. She responded with the same cold certainty that had been building in her for months. "You're confused. You don't understand what we were trying to do." But I did understand. And so did the officers. They questioned her partners separately. According to my lawyer, that's when the cracks began to show. He tried to explain the forged documents as clerical mistakes, then blamed online forms, then claimed I had asked for help managing my affairs. But every excuse came apart under the weight of the facts. He grew tense, defensive, and eventually quiet. The kind of quiet you hear when someone realizes they're no longer in control of the story. The investigators took the case seriously. They reviewed the timeline, the requests made without my consent, the attempts to gain access to my medical records. They told me there was clear evidence of intentional exploitation. Hearing it confirmed by people who understood the law felt like a heavy truth settling in my chest. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't overreacting. I was being targeted. I watched all of this happen from the sidelines. My lawyer speaking for me, the officers gathering proof, my daughter pacing through the mess she created. And while there was justice in their actions, there was sorrow too. Because no matter what the law saw, she was still my child. But grief doesn't erase damage, and sorrow doesn't excuse betrayal. Should the law be harsher on those who exploit their parents? I didn't plan to lock the door that night. It just happened, the way a final breath leaves the body after holding on too long. For months, I kept that door unlocked, convincing myself she might walk in the way she used to, smiling, tired, but still my daughter. I told myself the unlocked door was hope. In truth, it was denial. It was me refusing to accept that the child I raised had chosen a path that didn't include me anymore. The house was quiet as always, but something inside me felt different. I stood in the hallway staring at the knob, remembering all the nights I sat in the living room pretending to read, while really listening for footsteps that never came. I remembered the years before all this, the ones filled with her voice calling out, "Dad?" as she walked through that same door without hesitation. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else's life now. I reached out and touched the lock. For a long moment, I waited for some feeling, fear, doubt, hope, to stop me from turning it. None came. Instead, I felt a stillness settle in my chest, a kind of tired acceptance that didn't need permission. I turned the lock slowly, hearing the soft click echo through the hallway. It sounded like closing a chapter I'd kept open far too long. Afterward, I sat at the kitchen table, the same place where everything had started to unravel. I thought about the months of worry, the paperwork that appeared without warning, the cold inspections disguised as visits. I thought about how close I came to losing control of my own life. Not because of strangers, but because of the person I trusted most. She didn't just drift away. She almost dismantled everything I spent a lifetime building. My phone vibrated with an email from my lawyer. He updated me on the charges the investigators were preparing: financial exploitation, attempted fraud, unlawful access to medical information. The case was moving forward, step by steady step. Reading his words brought no joy, no sense of victory. It brought a quiet kind of strength, the kind that grows when you finally stop fighting to be loved by someone who no longer sees you. I closed the email and stared at the walls around me. Simple, worn, familiar. This home had held every version of my life. Fatherhood, grief, pride, and now this painful clarity. I wasn't the man she described to others. I wasn't slipping. I wasn't confused. I had simply hoped too long for someone who had already let go. When I stood to turn off the lights, I didn't glance toward the door the way I used to. I didn't wait or wonder. The lock was in place, firm and final. And for the first time in months, I felt the smallest breath of peace. Not happiness, just peace. She may never come home again. And as hard as that truth is, I finally understand it isn't my burden to fix. My only job now is to live the rest of my life with the dignity she tried to take from me, and to close the chapter where I waited for someone who chose to walk away. I've spent many nights thinking about what gratitude really means, and I've learned it isn't something you owe to people who hurt you. It belongs to those who stay, those who show up without treating love like a chore. When you reach my age, you begin to understand that survival isn't just about keeping a roof over your head. It's about protecting your dignity, especially from the people you once trusted most. I look back at the past year and see not only betrayal, but the strength it forced out of me. I didn't want that strength, but I needed it. And now, standing on the other side of everything, I can finally breathe without waiting for the next blow. Aging changes you in ways no one warns you about. You start losing things quietly: your speed, your energy, your circle of people. But the hardest loss is the illusion that family will always act with love. My daughter taught me that. She taught me how quickly affection can turn into entitlement, how easily concern can twist into control. For a long time, I thought I owed her patience, forgiveness, explanation. Now I know better. Some actions close a door that cannot be opened again, no matter how much history sits behind it. The legal boundaries are in place now. My accounts are secured, my medical decisions protected, and the courts have made it clear that she and her partner have no authority over any part of my life. But the emotional boundaries are just as important. I no longer answer her calls. I no longer wait for updates. I no longer hold my breath, hoping she'll realize the damage she caused. Forgiveness isn't a requirement of age. It's a gift, and gifts are not owed to people who treat your life like something they can rearrange. Justice did its job, quietly, firmly, and without revenge. The charges weren't about punishing her. They were about protecting me from the threat she had become. People talk about closure like it's a warm blanket you wrap around yourself. But mine came in a colder form. It came from knowing the law saw me as worth defending when my own daughter didn't. It came from realizing I didn't have to keep the door open for someone who only came to take. Now, when I think about the future, I don't picture reunions or apologies. I picture mornings where I wake up without fear of what paperwork might arrive in the mail. Evenings where I lock the door because I want to, not because I'm finally ready to let go. Gratitude is no longer something I whisper toward the past. It's something I shape for myself, step by steady step. And I hold on to one simple truth: the people who stay, the people who protect, The people who choose love without condition. Those are the ones who deserve gratitude, not the ones who treat it like a burden. Should a parent forgive a child who treats love like a burden?